Okay, so we're going to start just with arriving, just with a very brief meditation practice. So I'm going to invite you, wherever you are, however you are, just to sit with your legs uncrossed and to sit with both feet flat on the ground if you can, if you're in a position where you're able to do that. Sitting with a tall spine and just gently resting the eyes closed. And let's just take a deep breath together. So breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. And then gently letting the lips come together again and beginning to breathe in and out of the nose. Just acknowledging the state that you've come in, your mood state, your energy state, your emotional state, any lingering thoughts, ideas, worries or concerns, anything lingering from the day. Maybe you've had a particularly energizing day, or maybe you've had a particularly depleting day. Just observing that as you come into this replenishing state of inner awareness, that maybe you can just set yourself one word as your state that you want to remain in for the rest of this masterclass, whether it's openness or curiosity or learning. Whatever it might be, just acknowledging what your own hope or intention is for the session. And at the same time, just observing how it would be to let go of any strong expectation. Acknowledging how you are and with your intention set, taking 2 more deep breaths in your own time. And then blinking your eyes open. Okay, so I'm now going to share my screen with you, and we're going to have a look at a few slides together. So let me share this and, oh no, not that one. Present, that's it. Okay, wonderful. So can someone just give me a nod that you can see that, can't you? Yeah, Okay, Joe's nodding at me. Wonderful. So this is also this is my first time using these Canva slides, and my first demonstration of my new beautiful branding colors and my new logo. So I'm really excited to be sharing all of this with you. So we're going to be talking about women's menstrual health, 4 phases of the female reproductive cycle. Okay. So the first thing that I would love for us to do together, if you have something to write on close to you, just want you to jot down whatever comes to mind for you about what is your period story. And actually, before you do that, I just want to share a little bit about mine, just to give you an idea of the kind of thing that I'm asking you to acknowledge and recognize here. So the reason that I'm really passionate about educating women about menstrual health and talking about it is that it can be a bit of a societal taboo. And also I began studying about yoga and menstrual health because I've been on my own journey of positive menstrual health. So I was on the contraceptive pill for a long time, like 15 years, I think. And then I thought life was great when I was on it. So just to acknowledge by saying that if you are here or watching this and you are on any kind of contraceptive pill, this will still apply to you. But of course, when you're on any kind of hormonal contraception, then that is shutting down the natural hormonal fluctuations that happen in our bodies. So in particular, and this is really what I didn't know when I was on the pill, because you're not told it. Young women generally are not told what happens to your body when you're given the hormonal pill. So you don't have a follicular phase and ovulation doesn't happen. So we're going to talk about this. So if this doesn't mean anything to you, then don't worry at this stage. But basically, the artificial hormones that go into your body with the pill trick your body into sensing that it's pregnant when your body isn't. So all of the natural processes that happen when you're not on hormonal contraception get suppressed. So that was true for me for a long time. And then I came off the pill, and I've always been quite fortunate in that I've never had very severe PMS. I've never had particularly heavy periods. But then when I came off the pill, my hormones went haywire, and I had an awful time actually for I was still teaching yoga, but maybe like 2 years. My skin was awful. My moods were really erratic. And now my cycle is much longer than the average. So the average reproductive cycle is around 28 days. Mine at the moment is about between like 40 to 45 days. I wasn't really taught very much, or me and my mum didn't really discuss very much about my periods when I was growing up. So it wasn't something that I felt very educated on as a teenager either. I went to an all-girls school. I remember having like a really embarrassing incident when I went to the gym when I was probably about 16 or 17, and I was wearing white trousers, and my period started, and I was bleeding through the trousers but didn't realize at the time until I got home. So I'm just telling you that, first of all, to kind of acknowledge that this is like a really vulnerable area to share around, but also just to get us into this rhythm of recognizing what our own period story is. Maybe you've got a past period story, maybe you've got a current one. It's the kind of thing of generally, how do you feel about your period? How were you educated about it or not educated about it? Is it something that you dread? Is it something that feels very natural to you and you're very at peace with it or at ease with it? So I'm just going to invite you to jot you know, it might be one thing or it might be a few things down. Things that are true for you. What is your period story? Okay. And then just bringing whatever sentence or phrase or statement you're on to an end. You might want to continue that after our masterclass and time together. Okay. Okay. So I'm not going to ask you to share that, by the way, publicly, but it's good just to acknowledge what our own current relationship is like with our own cycle, because ultimately our reproductive cycle can be something that we align ourselves with rather than push against every month. And I hear so much, so many varying narratives around how women feel towards their period, you know, and you get things like social media bans. Like I've heard recently that Instagram will take off images around women bleeding because they deem it as like sexual content. You know, it's like, it's rubbish really when stuff like that happens, because this is a natural process, and millions of women around the world suppress it, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. Like I've said, I've done that for years. Millions of women don't even know what happens during their reproductive cycle. Many women feel awful about it and hate getting their period and dread it. But just, you know, just considering for a moment, what would it be like to actually maybe not dread your period coming every month, not have to completely let the world around you or let your own world stop or be in pain when it comes to your period? What would it be like to take your foot off the pedal or decrease the stress in your life? We're all in this very stressful time, but stress is such a huge factor for women, particularly with the menstrual cycle. So adrenal burnout, adrenal fatigue, so many conditions actually, and hormonal imbalance come about as a result, or they're exacerbated by stress. So just to say that before we kind of delve into what the menstrual cycle is and the different phases. So what do I actually mean, just to start with the basics, what do I actually mean when I say the menstrual cycle? So we're going to talk this evening about phases 1 and 2, the period stage and the follicular stage. So the menstrual cycle begins on the first day of your period and it ends with the start of your next period. It's a fluctuating biological process governed by the endocrine system, so the hormonal system. And some of us are not even aware that the brain and the ovaries are connected. So what I mean by that is that the brain sends hormones. I'll go into this in more detail, but the brain sends hormones down to the ovaries, and the ovaries then release hormones that travel back up to the brain. So the menstrual cycle is made up of 4 hormonal phases, which set us apart from men. And in this Western world, many of us live in a way that doesn't really acknowledge that we are so beautifully different from men. And actually, our cycle can be our superpower rather than something that we fight against. It can be like a blueprint for our lives, a way of kind of organizing how the kind of choices that we make, the kind of activities that we engage in, and even our diet. Okay, so our diet can have a direct impact on our menstrual health and also on our ovaries. So you hear about brain health, but did you know there's such a thing as ovary health as well? Okay, so these are the 4 stages that we're going to be talking about. And sometimes when you see, this might be a completely new concept to you, this might be something that you're very familiar with. It's always good to refamiliarize ourselves with these materials, and also everyone tends to talk about them in a slightly different way. So you might see diagrams that are just split like completely down the middle, 1 line dividing the circle in half. And sometimes the ovulatory part of our cycle is just, it is a very brief process, but actually we can see that as a phase in itself. And just to say that, as I've talked about with my own cycle, there are huge variations. So the average cycle length is 28 days. And you can see here the average length of time that each phase of the cycle lasts. So when I talk about the start of the period, I mean, you know, some of you might get like light spotting, or your period might just suddenly start straight away. But I mean the start of any sign of blood. So that includes light spotting. And then some of you might get spotting, or your period might start and stop a little bit. So I'm talking right from the beginning to the end of any sign of bleeding. So the period can be anywhere between 3 to 7 days. The follicular phase is anywhere between 6 to 10 days. The ovulatory stage is anywhere 3 to 4 days. And then the luteal phase, which tends to be the most consistent phase for women, consistent in length across different cycles for you. And it's also the longest phase. So anywhere between 10 to 14 days. The other thing that you can see on this diagram is what our best hope is for each stage in connection with traditional Chinese medicine, which is what I'm in the course of studying, this interconnection between the understanding of traditional Chinese medicine and menstrual health. So for those of you not familiar, TCM, for short, traditional Chinese medicine, is a holistic approach to health. It takes into account the whole individual in comparison to Western medicine. So this is a form of Eastern medicine. Western medicine, if you go and see your GP, for example, in the UK, very, very likely that it will be very symptom based. So they'll look at one particular symptom that you describe, and then they may go on to either give you medication or whatever they do from then on. So this is a very different way of looking at health, at holistic health. So there are a couple of terms in here that I just want to introduce to you. So first of all, qi, Q-I, qi, very similar to what we talk about in yoga as prana or energy or flow. So this is the can otherwise be seen as potential. So it can be understood as matter which is on the verge of becoming energy. So this is particularly beneficial within any point of the cycle where we want to see movement or change. So it's particularly during the period, it's particularly mid-cycle. The other words on there are blood, so that's a really obvious one. Literal physical blood. And when we think about blood in traditional Chinese medicine and menstrual health, we think of it being a liquid, obviously, but also it's to do with the lining of the endometrial lining. So we are preparing the lining for implantation. So it's that kind of building up of liquid. So that's why I'm going to go into more into this in detail, but that's why within the follicular phase, we want to make sure that we are preparing the endometrial lining within that stage. And then the other two words are yin and yang. So some of you may be familiar with the one of the really basic foundational principles of TCM, which is the yin-yang model, where you have the black dot in the white background and vice versa. So yang is a very warm energy. So they're opposites of each other. And the yin stage is the follicular stage. So between follicular and ovulation, we move from yin to yang. So yang is a very warming stage, and yin is a much softer stage where we have this follicle and egg growth happening. So just to make sure that you understand what that vocabulary refers to when it comes to TCM. Okay, so phase 1, period. And the other thing that I'm going to introduce you to is this idea that we can view our reproductive cycle as having 4 seasons. So we can link phase 1 of our cycle as our winter, okay? And one of the main things to visualize this within this phase is shedding or letting go at both a physical and an energetic level. So when we have our bleed, our period, we are literally clearing out our system. Okay, so we are clearing out the endometrium. If you imagine wiping a whiteboard clean or anything that you want to be really thorough so that new and fresh processes can start to happen. And this is so natural for all of us. Okay, regardless of whether you already have children, whether you're wanting to have children, whether you're not wanting to have children, whether you're thinking about conception or not, phase 1, the period, is all about clearing out. So during this period of time, it's very commonly discussed that the period is a time when women rest. And whilst that is true, there's a slightly different understanding within TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, where we do want to increase circulation and a downward flow of blood during this time. So I'm going to talk in a moment about stagnation, but if you have anything in your system which is not getting thoroughly cleared out, then you definitely want to be focusing on circulation. So going back to my personal story, I know that I have some symptoms of stagnation because my cycle is longer than the average. So it's showing that things are not moving through as much as they could be. I also have really cold hands and feet, drives my partner crazy. But that's another sign of poor circulation. So let's go on to think about hormonal. I'm going to come back to that slide in a moment. Period signs. Okay, so indicators of hormonal health. If you do experience stagnation. Stagnation is not only about having an irregular cycle, it's any sign of pain. So pain with the period, irritability, those really classic signs of PMS, tension, frustration. So there is this kind of belief that PMS is just a thing. Like, you know, we have PMS, it has to be in existence. But actually, it doesn't. And just because you've suffered or experienced something for a long time doesn't mean it's always going to be that way. Change is always possible. The other parts of this slide are just some indicators of when your bleed does come, what signs there may be of health or different indicators of hormones as well. So you've got brown stains, clots, heavy bleeding, a shorter bleed, very frequent bleeds. And what are the kind of things that you might want to look out for? So as I've already said, I'm not here as any kind of diagnosis or diagnostic criteria, but all of this is just a way of you as a woman feeling more empowered and educated about what is already going on in your body. Okay, so at this stage, yes, okay, I'm going to just go through some of the major hormones going on. So just to give you a very basic description before I do that about when I talk about ovaries and follicles, what do I mean by that? So ovarian follicles are small sacs filled with fluid that are found inside a woman's ovaries. They secrete hormones which influence stages of the menstrual cycle, and women begin puberty with about 300,000 to 400,000 of them. Each has the potential to release an egg for fertilization. Okay, so just to start with that basic understanding. And at this stage, I am going to stop the share for a moment so that I can load up a different document around the hormones in our system. Okay, so I'm going to share something with you written by one of my mentors, Carly Slade, Moon Forest Flow on social media. She has given me permission to share this. Highly recommend checking her out. She's a massive advocate of menstrual cycle tracking and living your life in line with your cycle. So let me share screen again. Here we go. Okay. So these are, I'm not going to read all this out, but you can take it in at your leisure. These are the main hormonal messengers that impact a natural menstrual cycle and how they relate to the processes and to each other. So you've got GnRH, you've got FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. You've got LH, you've got estrogen, you've got progesterone, and then the one that people are often surprised about is testosterone, which is not only a hormone that exists for men, but it does impact the female experience in a very important way. Okay. So I will refer to some of these. Don't worry if you haven't taken all of that in, if you're not really too fussed about it, or if you've not had a chance to read all of it, don't worry. I just want you to be aware of the major ones, because I will refer to them, and it's just good to know. I mean, these are messengers that literally are happening in your body right now. Like, you know, it's kind of just educating ourselves on the reality. And empowering ourselves, as I've already said. Okay, so I'm going to stop share again, and then I'm going to come back to the slides. Okay. So what happens during the period at a hormonal level? So the progesterone and estrogen levels drop, and I'm just going to share some tips, some really broad tips around what you might consider during this phase. So it's a great time in terms of your diet to include warm foods. I mean, we're kind of gravitating towards those at this time of year anyway, right? But soups and stews, and also if you're ever considering any kind of detox process, it's not for everyone, but any kind of like, you know, juice cleanse, or even for those of you who know about Ayurveda, like Ayurvedic cleanse, this is a really good time of your cycle to be considering that. Just consider the intensity of the process of your period. You are literally eliminating the line of the uterus. So it's a good idea, that should say, to add in nutrients, foods with a low glycemic index, so not much sugar, and loads of water-rich fruit and vegetables. So seaweed or seaweed-based food is a really good idea. We want food or supplements that are high in iron and zinc. And on a TCM level, we want foods that are restorative to the blood and kidneys. Now, as I've said, this is often a more restful phase for many women because we don't feel like doing much. But really, this is a fantastic time to be tuning in with what's enjoyable to you in this phase. It's a really good time of the month to be regulating tension, to be taking relaxation, which generally is a good thing to be doing anyway, promoting any kind of downward flow. So there, like I've said, there is this idea that we just completely come to a stop during our period, and that might be true for some if you have a lot of pain, or that you just don't really intuitively feel like doing very much. But for some of us, we do. So I know personally, especially towards like the last few days of my period, I can start to feel like I want to be a little bit more active again. So anything, if you think about anything that's very grounding, so squats, paying attention to the feet and the legs, modified sun salutations, and I've put compression in there. So when I say compression, compression can be a really helpful tool for circulation. So if you think about, for those of you who are familiar with yoga or practice with me regularly, if you think about being in a child's pose and taking two fists and literally having your fists, doesn't sound very pleasant, but it's good for us, in your abdomen, or using rolled up blankets in positions like pigeon or squats or forward folds, anything where you get some healthy compression, often around the abdomen or around the pelvic area. So what comes more naturally to you at this phase? Walking, stretching, lighter movements, and also it's a really great time for self-analysis and course correction. So we are very naturally more intuitive during this stage. And this is because, this is fascinating, the communication between the left and the right hemispheres of the brain is more powerful at this phase than any other time. How amazing is that? That is not true for men. So it's a really great time for journaling. It's a really great time to be paying attention to not only, you know, what comes up for you at that particular time, but looking out for patterns over a course of a few months or even a few years, looking at whether you come up against the same thoughts, worries, and fears at this time. So a great time to be going inwards. Okay, so I'm just going to see, I don't think there's anything in the chat, but I'm just going to have a look to see if there is. No, okay, apart from Anna. So do feel free to pop any questions in there whilst I'm going through phase 2. So anything that I'm saying, you can talk to me privately on the chat as well. Anything that I've said that you don't understand or you want me to go back over, this is one of the things about being here live, that you can do that. So I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to move on to phase 2. Okay. Keep pressing the button. Phase 2. So we can think about phase 2 as being our springtime, our follicular stage. So what is happening at this stage? This is where the development of the follicles in the ovaries, as well as the building of the lining of the endometrium. So there's 2 processes happening at the same time. So if you think about it and think about what we very naturally want to support, again, even when you're not trying to get pregnant, but what your body is naturally trying to do is gather nutrients to support life. Estrogen levels are rising. This thickens the uterine lining and also supports the growth of immune system cells in the uterus. And also the pituitary in the brain at this time, this is the link between the brain and the ovaries, releases the FSH hormone, and this initiates follicular growth in the ovaries, and then the follicle releases estrogen, which goes back to the brain. Around this time, testosterone takes a quick surge, and then it drops off around ovulation. So very important within this phase, within the TCM model understanding, to be nourishing what we call, or what's known as, yin and blood. So every phase of the cycle, we don't just see them in separate parts. We want to be supporting the next stage all the time. So in order for it to be this constant flow, literally a flow, but it to be a constant cycle, like the cycle of life, we always want to be thinking about what's going to come. So the practices that are going to be good for you during the follicular stage are very dependent on your lifestyle. Also, just to say that some of you may have no idea how long your follicular stage is or when it happens. So the follicular stage happens the day after your period ends, and then it's normally 6 to 10 days, and it goes on until the day of ovulation. If you don't know when you're ovulating, which a lot of us don't, some of us don't ovulate, then you basically work it out as an approximation. So you can have the rough idea that your follicular stage is around 10 days, something like that. And even if you apply these tips for that period of time, it's still going to be beneficial. So if you have a lifestyle where you're very active, so say you did sports for a living, I know there's no one who does that here, but say you were an Olympic athlete, it's going to be much more beneficial for you to incorporate a lot more restful practices in this time. But if you're someone who sits all day for work, which I know some of us do, then it's a good idea to do some practices that improve circulation again. So circulation is such a huge thing in TCM because we want to keep everything moving. So for those of you who are familiar or have been for acupuncture or any kind of like holistic practice, that is based on the same principle, to keep things moving around our body. Having said that, most of us in the Western world as women are very busy. We often have caregiving duties. We often have huge cognitive or energetic demands for work. I know that's true for some of us in here. So in that case, you may be approaching your cycle in a way where you are very, very depleted. And as I started off the presentation by saying, stress, depletion, adrenal burnout, adrenal fatigue, this is going to affect your whole cycle. So if you know you are generally quite depleted and quite a busy person, hands up, I am, then yin restorative practices with some incorporation of positive circulation is generally, as a broad brush, generally beneficial. Really good to be thinking about how you are replenishing yourself during this phase. In terms of lifestyle adaptations, because of the hormonal changes that we see during this phase, it's a really good stage to be connecting with others. It's a really good time to be having important conversations. It's a great phase to ask for a pay rise if you ever consider doing that, or doing anything which at other phases of your cycle you may find a bit more difficult. So socializing, difficult conversations with your partner, and that's because your communication skills during this phase tend to be heightened. You've got plenty of natural energy, plus some stability in your mood due to estrogen. So in terms of the diet, it's a good idea to stick to lighter foods, lighter grains, lots of fruit and veg. It's a good time to incorporate raw foods if you eat raw foods. And we can impact the healthiest environment for the egg, the follicle, through our diet. So I'm not going to go into that because I'm not a nutritional therapist, but if you're thinking about conception, or if you're just thinking about overall health, really, then this stage is all about creating the best environment for a follicle to flourish. So you can do that through your diet too. Energy levels do tend to be higher. So I say this with a note of caution. It is a good time to be choosing higher impact exercise and more sociable group settings. I know some of you do that like on a week basis, which is great if that's for you. I've done that previously. I do tend to now back off it at certain stages of my cycle because my energy just naturally decreases. But so, for example, like I'm in my follicular stage now, I'm in my spring. So I'm logging on, 2 to 3 times a week to be part of a group, because I know that it serves me. I know that I feel good doing that. At other phases of my cycle, it doesn't feel so good. And I think sometimes we get into these routines and these habits and these things that we just do week on week. And sometimes that's great. Sometimes that's because we enjoy them, we get a lot from them. But we have this very natural, intuitive way of living as women, and this has been something that's gone on for thousands of years, and somehow in the Western world it's gotten suppressed. So this is just to kind of introduce the idea to you that you can cater your practices. I'm not saying, you know, stop doing something you enjoy for weeks on end, definitely not. But have you ever had that feeling where you want to push yourself to do a higher impact workout, but then actually you end up being more knackered as a result? I don't know if that's true for some of you, but or sometimes you feel like you want to go out for a run, but actually in the longer term and for your energy levels, it might have just been like, you know, a walk with some stretching that's more beneficial for you. So this is just literally living in line with our hormones, rather than feeling like we have to constantly push against what's happening for us as women. Okay, and that, my loves, is it in terms of information give. I know that that's quite a lot in a short space of time. So I will send you the recording. You can look over it in your own time. That's, wow, I really thought I was going to go way over, and that is bang on an hour. I am like impressed with we're at 9 o'clock. I'm impressed with myself, and we didn't even start until 10 past. So I do love to talk. Next week, we're going to cover our summer and our autumn. So that is our ovulatory phase and our luteal phase, where things get a little bit more complex. I'm going to stop the recording now. So if you're watching back, I really hope you've enjoyed this.